Like the diagnosis they gave to my parents after that first surgery was that it was terminal. They gave me a year to live.
So we'll go ahead and get started, and we'd like to start at the very beginning. Kayla, could you introduce yourself?
My name is Kayla. I am 24 years old and I live in Canada on the west coast in BC.
So in British Columbia near Vancouver, perhaps?
Yeah.
I just moved 5 months ago from Seattle, my family and I.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we're not that far, and I happen to work for a Canadian company. So I imagine I'll be making some trips up to Vancouver when, the border opens and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So 24, and you were diagnosed with a brain tumor at the early age of 15. Talk to us about that, because you're very young. Certainly, that's not an expected thing to have happen at the age of 15. What initially sparked sort of the concern for you?
It was 2012 and I woke up one morning and I had my tongue all chewed up, and so I looked it up and it was like, oh, you probably had a seizure. And so I went to my mom and I'm like, Mom, I think I had a seizure. And she's like, I can't believe everything you read on the internet. And I was like, okay, if you say so. And then the next day we were out in a different city for my brother's hockey game, and we were all staying in the same hotel room. And my mom woke me up the next morning and she's like, do you remember what happened last night? And I was like, no, what happened? And she's like, you had a massive seizure. And I was like, well, I told you so. And so we went to the hospital, the emergency room. They took all my vitals, they tested my reflexes, and they couldn't see anything wrong with me. My reflexes were fine. There was nothing wrong with me medically that they could determine. So they decided to do a EEG, which is a thing where they just like test the brain electricity. They put like electrodes on your head and they'll just to see what your brain's doing. So they test you like while you're sleeping. And so essentially they came back with that I had epilepsy and I was having mini seizures while I was sleeping. So if I wasn't having a full blown seizure, I was never making it to full REM sleep. So that was a concern. And so they had me go see an epilepsy doctor and we kind of talked out, like, started me on a anti-seizure medication and just like what that meant for me. But they also decided to do a follow-up MRI to make sure that there wasn't something else going on. And so they found a 7-centimeter tumor on the side of my head. And it was pretty devastating. Even at that age, I had a pretty good understanding of what cancer was because I had two of my aunts died of cancer before I was born. They were teenagers when they died, and then my grandmother died when I was 5 of cancer, and my mom had cancer when I was 3. So I was very aware of what cancer was even at the time. So I was pretty devastated by the diagnosis, as was my family. And so we just started the process. We talked to a doctor. They recommended surgery, followed probably by radiation and chemo. And so
you go initially to get consulted for epilepsy. Between consulting the doctor about epilepsy and the MRI, how long would you say that took?
It wasn't very long because it was at a children's hospital. So I would say it was a matter of weeks. I think I started having seizures at the end of October or beginning of November, and I had my first surgery by the end of November. So things moved really quickly.
Oh, wow. And so any sign before that point that anything was wrong now in hindsight 2020, anything?
Nothing at all, really. I lacked some motivation in school to turn in homework. Like, it's not that it wasn't getting done, or maybe it wasn't getting done, I don't exactly remember, but my homework wasn't getting turned in. But you can very easily chalk that up to me being a teenager, just not wanting to do my work. So it was really, nothing was really there at all to indicate that something was wrong.
Sure. And so you get the confirmation of the 7 centimeters. Where did you look through for information, and where were you getting advice?
Mostly just from doctors. I got a lot of I talked a lot with my mom because she'd had cancer before, but mostly we just spoke to the doctors for advice. I didn't do a lot of the research at the time because it was more my parents doing and them kind of helping guide me, but I didn't really do a ton of research on my own. They didn't know what kind of brain tumor it was, and so doing my own research wasn't really have been any help anyways, because until they can determine what kind it is, the diagnosis and prognosis vary wildly.
Sure. And it's tragic that your mom went through cancer as well, but fortunate for you that she had that experience to draw upon to share with you. What were some of the things that she shared during your conversations?
No, it was conversations that we'd had before that as well. But she had a very carpe diem attitude. She was all about living every day for that day and living in the moment and just taking things as they come. And so that was, I think, I mean, her biggest advice to me even before we started that journey. And I neglected to mention, but she had been diagnosed with bone cancer about a month before I was diagnosed with my brain tumor. So
Oh,
we were
wow.
kind of going through it together, and we just took things as they came, and I approached it very pragmatically, like, okay, so this is what the doctor recommends. This is what we got to do for me to get better. So let's just do it.
Wow. And wow, that's such a hard thing for the family as a whole. Both of you going through such a difficult time. Did that make it more difficult because there was, the double burden of different appointments, different visits, different workups, different interventions?
I think for the rest of the family, it was probably very challenging. But for me, it made it easier just to have someone there going through it with me at the same time was very comforting, actually, because we were able to connect quite deeply because of our shared experience, and we chatted a lot. And by the end of it, she was my best friend in the entire world. Like, we got so close. So it was easier for me, but I suspect that for my brother and for the rest of my family, it was so challenging.
Sure. And your brother is older? You said he was
Younger, he's
uh,
21. Yeah, he'll be 21 this year.
and how was he processing? I imagine it was.
I mean, at the time, he didn't really seem any different. He was outgoing and fun, but as time has gone on in hindsight, I can definitely see that it affected him. He fell in with a bit of a rough crowd, and he's dealing with it.
Sure, sure,
But he's also like, he's in therapy, but I suspect he doesn't really tell the therapist anything.
sure. And I think time helps with many things, but hopefully he manages through as well. You get the surgery. Could you describe what the surgery's like and how you approached it?
3 surgeries actually. But the first one, it was interesting. I just started my first job at a wedding venue. Hadn't even had my first shift, just done training. And I remember very distinctly like driving to the hospital that morning and texting my boss and being like, "Yeah, I don't think I can come in for that shift." And then I never heard back from her or anything. So I got hired and then basically like fired. Like,
Oh, geez.
it wasn't really a big deal. I wouldn't have been able to work that much anyways. But I remember going in. My mom had a lot of friends. A lot of family had like flown in, and I was surrounded by a lot of people going into it, and everyone was just like a buzz with nervous energy. And I like remember looking to my dad, and he's like holding back tears, and I'm like, "Are you okay, Dad?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm totally fine." And I'm like, "Sure you are, Dad." Like, I was completely calm, very, like I said, very pragmatic about it. I really didn't see any reason to be concerned or worried. Like, the doctors are going to do what the doctors are going to do. There's nothing that I can do to affect it in any way. So I'm just going to let them do that. And like I said, it was probably easier for me than it was for them because all I had to do was get knocked out with anesthetic, and they had to wait those however many hours it was for me to come out of it. But I wasn't worried.
And what had the doctors told you leading up to the surgery about likelihood of success or anything like that?
They weren't concerned. The fact that it was such a large tumor and I'd had no side effects other than the seizures up to that point indicated to them that it had been very slow growing. And so slow growing tumors typically tend to be quite benign. And so there wasn't anything to worry about other than to just get the mass out of there. And I mean, there's always some risks to be expected with brain surgery, but they were very optimistic that it would be a successful surgery.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, and gives you a lot of reassurance going into it. Certainly,
Mhm.
your parents are probably very distraught and worried, but it sounds like your doctors were doing the best thing they could. So talk about the recovery from that initial surgery. What was that like?
Recovery was actually quite easy. I remember my first day in the ICU told me that I couldn't have any solids, so I could have like jello or yogurt or soup, but I couldn't have any solids. And I remember a friend calling my mom and asking like if she wanted anything from Starbucks, and I was like, "Oh, I'd like a yogurt parfait." And it has a little bit of solids in it, and my mom was like, "Well, you can't have any solids, Kayla." And I was like, "Well, okay, how do I work my way up to eating solids? And give me that parfait, I'm gonna have it." And so I like talked to the nurses, and they're like, "Okay, you can have the parfait if you can work your way up to solids, and none of it returns to sender." And so we worked our way from like just liquids to jello to like oatmeal, and I by the end of the day I had my parfait, and I was out of the hospital in I think like 3 or 4 days, like less than a week. I recovered remarkably quickly.
Wow, no, that's incredible, and that you were able to get to solid so quickly as well. Was there any pain at all? Were you on medications at all?
After the first couple of days, I don't think I was on anything at all. I wasn't right out of surgery. They were still giving me morphine. And I think I was on morphine for like the first day or so, and after that they downgraded me to T3s, and by the time I went home, they just said regular Tylenol should help. So I wasn't on any painkillers other than over-the-counter Tylenol.
Sure. And so very disruptive, clearly, right? You mentioned that you were going to go into your first job and that didn't happen clearly. What about school? How
School was not affected greatly. I was out of school for about a week after the surgery was after I got out of the hospital, and I remember getting back to school and being really disappointed because I was in drama classes and I'd missed the stage makeup day, and I was so disappointed because I'd been looking forward to that all semester, and it I wasn't able to do my swim meet because you can't submerge yourself in like water until 2 or 3 weeks after surgery. So I couldn't participate in my swim meet, but I did go and cheer all my friends on.
No, that's great. And how did your friends respond?
They were all really supportive. They were really great. I had one of my friends pretend to be me because at the swim meet because she didn't have any of her own thing. She was on the swim team, but she hadn't signed up for anything, so she just pretended to be me. They were very supportive.
Oh, that's wonderful. Did she do well?
No, she was terrible. I was like, oh, she's giving me a bad name.
Oh, that's funny. Funny. And so that was your first surgery that you had mentioned, and the recovery sounds like it went extremely well.
Yeah.
And what prompted the next surgery, and how long between then? And was there an issue that occurred that prompted the next one?
So they did a prognosis of the tumor kind of mid-surgery, and that prognosis had determined that it was a benign tumor. There's nothing to worry about, and so they sent me back to school optimistic that there wouldn't be any concerns. But they did a more in-depth kind of biopsy of it, and they determined that it was basically a stage 4 tumor. And so a lesion that they'd seen on this side of my brain, which they suspected could probably just be like a birth defect, nothing to be worried about, suddenly became a very large issue of concern, as brain tumors have a nasty habit of burrowing their way and showing up somewhere else. So they wanted to go in and check and see on this side if that was also cancerous cells. And so that was probably no more than 2 weeks after my first surgery. They brought us in and told us that, and so they got me into surgery right away. Once again, really quick recovery. I think that one was the most painful immediately after the surgery, or maybe it was the third one. It was that one or the third one that was the most painful afterwards because it was shorter, and so they'd given me less pain medication, and so it was a lot harder to mitigate the pain. But again, I was out really quickly. I don't think I made it back to school that time before the third one, as the results did come back as it was cancerous, and so they decided that they wanted to go back in on this side and do like a wider cut around where the tumor had been, just to get any more cells that might be cancerous. It was the most risky surgery that they were going to do because there was no tumor there anymore. They were just going off of like hoping not to go too deep, but wanting to get any cells that were cancerous but hadn't been able to turn into the tumor yet. And so there was a very good risk of them cutting too deep. And
Sure.
so they left that up to me. They're like, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. If this is my best chance of making sure it doesn't come back, I absolutely want to do this. And my surgeon was fantastic. Like, my parents did a bunch of research before we did all the surgeries to see like who is the best brain surgeon in the world, like we will move if we have to get me the best amount of care. And we were very fortunate that he was right where we lived, and he was excellent, and he did a great job. And I got out of the hospital 2 days before Christmas.
Oh, wow. And that becomes extremely memorable and a very important Christmas for sure, leading up to that. But you mentioned that the recovery this time was a little bit harder, or at least the pain was a little bit tougher.
Right out of surgery, yeah. I also was a little bit more loopy. I definitely had some gaps in my memory. I remember saying to my mom, like, when is Dad gonna visit? And she was like, he literally just left. And so I was a little bit loopy from the morphine on that one. So
And
it was, but the recovery wasn't extensively longer on either of them. I was out of the hospital very quickly on both.
that's great. And so 3 surgery. What happened next? What were the follow-ups and
So next was radiation. They wanted to radiate my head. Of course, they gave me the option, but they also wanted to do a chemotherapy. But they didn't, for the specific kind of cancer I had, they didn't recommend that I do the regular intravenous chemo. They wanted me to do an oral chemo, and they only would do it while I was doing my radiation. And so I was there at the radiation facility every day for 6 weeks. Didn't affect me that much. Like, there was definitely days of fatigue, but I went to school. I've spent most of my semester at school. One of the counselors at the school, there was a spare office, set up a little like makeshift cot in there for me. So if I was feeling like really worn down during classes, I kind of had a free pass to just like dip out of class and just go lay down for a few hours or however long I needed to. And so my school was fantastic. They were great about supporting me and making sure that I did as good as I could while going through all of that. And I mostly didn't miss school. There was a couple days where I was just like, I'm not well enough to go, but for the most part, I was fine.
and was it typically immediately after the radiation treatments that you felt worst, and how long?
It wasn't really any specific time. It was just, I think, the build up, and some days it was worse than others, but I went every day. So there wasn't no immediate reaction to the radiation. It was just I was more fatigued in general, and my radiologist was also excellent. He pioneered a experimental method on me where he bent the radiation rays around my hair follicles so I wouldn't lose my hair, because oftentimes, in most cases, if they're doing radiation on someone's head, they'll permanently lose their hair. And he was very racked with concern that someone as young as me would lose my hair forever. And so he figured that if they could bend the radiation rays around eyes and like the important part of the brain, why can't we just bend it around the hair follicles as well? And so, as you can see, I have a full head of hair, and it worked fantastically.
Wow, that is so great. And I imagine that not everyone uses this technique even today, because
I don't know. But he did speak to my mom a few months later and asked her if it was working, and she said yeah. So he brought it to a board of other radiologists, and I suspect it's used on other people as well now.
oh, that is so wonderful to know that something that was useful and helped you is now out there helping others. That's wonderful. And so, how many courses of radiation and how long were you undergoing radiation therapy? And
It was 6 weeks. from kind of mid-January to the end of February every day. So I'm not very good at math, but
I know there's
6 times 7 is
42 days.
yeah. So 42 days of radiation treatment every day, and by the end of it, it was just fatigue. And then I
Mm.
had 3 more surgeries.
Oh, and then you had 3 more surgeries.
Um,
And you had mentioned that were taking the oral chemotherapy as
yes.
well. Were there any side effects from the chemo?
Not that I noticed, but I mean, it would be hard to differentiate what the effects of the chemo were in comparison to the radiation. It's just it would be impossible to tell if it was the radiation or the chemo that was making me.
And you mentioned 3 more surgeries. So what
Yeah.
prompted those surgeries?
So I had a lot of MRIs at that period of time, and they did one to just like check up, make sure that the cancer hadn't come back, and I was all free and clear on cancer, but I had a collection of fluid on where my large tumor had been. And there were 2 possibilities. It was either a hematoma, which is just a collection of blood that they can drain, or it was an infection. And so my surgeon was concerned, so he did some blood work, got it requisitioned. My white blood cell count was up, but only slightly, and that could have very easily been attributed to just the radiation, the body reacting to it and coming down from that. But his gut was telling him that, like, I need to check this out. Like, even if it's just a hematoma, it has to be drained eventually. So he got me in right away, and he did the surgery. It did turn out to be an infection. They mentioned that there was a risk that if the blood was or the bone was infected, they would have to take the bone out. And I was like, please don't take the bone out. I have a lot of summer activities I like to do. And so they didn't do that. Put a PICC line in my arm, which is just intravenous line that goes from your arm to your hearts for antibiotics, so that you don't have to inject yourself all the time, and it's very easy to maintain for however long you need it for. And so they cut into it, they got rid of the infection. Spent about a week in the hospital, and then I went home and got really sick. Actually, I wasn't sick or have any symptoms of an infection or anything leading up to that surgery. It was all my surgeon's gut feeling that something was wrong. But after the surgery and after I got sent home, I got really, really sick. I just felt awful. I've never felt that sick before in my life. And I spent like the week at home pretty much bedridden after I got there. And then we had a home care nurse come to flush my PICC line just to make sure that there was nothing getting stuck in it. And my head started leaking out of my scar, and she's like, yeah, you need to take her to the emergency room like yesterday.
Wow.
So we went to the emergency room. We walked in. They saw my head was leaking, and there was no waiting. They're like, all right, we got a room for you right now. Let's get you in there.
Wow.
And I was in the waiting room probably till around midnight when they were able to get me a bed on just in the hospital. And they kept trying to get me to drink something, as if I had surgery the next day, I couldn't have anything after midnight. But I refused it. I was like, I just don't feel well enough to drink anything. And I wish I had now, looking back. And the next morning, I woke up with fever shakes. The nurse came in. She got my surgeon and the RNs, and like all of the people in my team were like, they were there, and they're like, yeah, this is not very good. So they did an emergency surgery. It turned out that the bone was infected, and so they had to take the
Oh,
bone
wow.
out.
Wow.
And so I went for about 8 months without a bone flap here.
Wow.
And so that kind of put a damper on my summer plans, but I just wore helmets a bunch to keep my head safe.
Sure.
And
Mhm.
my surgeon was able to get a surgeon's plastic 3D printed replacement. And so December 10th in 2013, I had my final surgery, and they put the bone flap, well, not the bone flap, but like the replacement piece back in.
Wow. And that's a miracle in and of itself that even that such a thing is possible. I would never have known. Yeah. And that several months with missing a piece of your bone, wearing a helmet, how did that make you feel and how did you manage through that?
I was pretty stubborn about it. There was a lot of things that I just couldn't do, and I accepted that. But I was a pretty avid runner in high school, and my mom didn't want me to go running in case I tripped. And I was like, if you're sending me to school, I have about an equal chance of like falling down in school and hurting my head as I do falling down while running. I'm not gonna stop running. I was pretty stubborn about it. I performed in a musical. Like I didn't really let it slow me down that much. I just had to like be a little more cautious on like I couldn't go like skidooing or boating or anything like that. I had to be a little bit more cautious, but I didn't really let it slow me down.
Oh, that's incredible. And that everyone was supportive as well. It's wonderful. Yeah, and I can imagine, right? Your mom going through her own journey at the same time. How was her journey progressing while you were going through all of this?
I don't actually really know. I mean, she had her own stuff going on. She had her own doctor's appointments and she had, I don't remember, I think she had radiation treatment that summer, but because it was bone cancer, it was a lot more intense because I mean, radiating bone is a lot different from radiating brain. They have to be a lot more chill when you're radiating the brain just to, because things can go really wrong. She had some pretty serious, like, third, almost fourth degree burns on her back from that just came up a few days after she finished her radiation because it was just so intense. And so we were like constant. I remember that summer so well. Just like she had this cream, this anti-bird cream, and we were constantly applying it to her back because she was just it was so burnt. And so she had oral chemo as well. I don't think during her whole experience she ever had the intravenous chemo. And so she did her own stuff and I mean I wasn't really paying attention to what she was doing because I mean I had my own stuff going on, but she troopered on and yeah, she it was tough for a little while there. She was not well, and then she'd get better, and then she'd get worse, and she'd get better, and then she'd get worse. A constant roller coaster of emotions with her.
Sure. And good that you were able to support each other, but
Mhm.
definitely challenging for everyone. And so you had the replacement plastic, and so that's what we're seeing today.
Yeah,
What's next in your journey? Is everything okay now, or has there been other things that have happened?
I'm pretty like I've been cancer free for almost 10 years now. It's very exciting. I'm very happy. I very much looked forward to my 5 year survivorship because then I could start giving blood again.
That's so great.
Um, like that's how I celebrated my 5 year cancer free. I was like, I'm gonna give blood. I'm gonna do that, and I was very excited. I do it as often as I can, and I mean it's just checkups at this point, just making sure that it doesn't come back. So I have MRIs every year just to make sure it's all good.
Any long-term things that have resulted from the procedures and the radiation and the chemo?
A brighter outlook on life. Actually, I'm very grateful that I had cancer. Actually, it made me a lot better of a person. I grew a lot from the experience, and I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't had it. All the long-term effects I've had have been very positive, just on my mental state and who I am as a person.
Wow, no, that's wonderful. You know, it's amazing to me. One of the things that I reflect on as I have these conversations is that there's no way to truly understand what someone has been through. You can listen and you can try to understand, but unless you've been through it, there's a part of it you'll never understand in a way. But it sounds like it was extremely challenging for those few years where you were going through it. But it also sounds like you took a lot from the experience and you've carried those good things forward. So that's very inspiring.
Yeah,
And I, yeah,
I could only really attribute it to my mom. She was so amazing, and I don't think if I hadn't had her guidance through all of that, if I would have come out of it as well as I did on the other side. And I ultimately, like, the diagnosis they gave to my parents after that first surgery was that it was terminal. They gave me a year to live.
Wow.
And I'd gone into that appointment and I told them, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna deal with it as it comes. I don't want to know, and I think I'm better for it. I think if they had told me, I think I would have been a lot more scared, and I don't think I could have approached it as pragmatically if I if they had told me that it was basically a hopeless case. They had no like they did their best for me and it turned out really well. And I'm really grateful for the team that I had. They were so wonderful.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that so this is an example where a hopeless case turned completely the other way around. And now your journey can hopefully give hope to others. And so that's wonderful. What advice do you have for individuals who are facing a similar challenge?
For me, it's just like living every day as they come. I really do follow my mom's carpe diem lifestyle. I try not to future surf too much. And I mean, I plan for the future, but I try not to worry or catastrophize. I find one thing I'm grateful for every day. We did this thing at the dinner table when I lived at home where it was like we went around the table and we said like one good thing that happened to us today and one bad thing that happened to us today. And we didn't have to have a bad thing, but we always had to have a good thing. And so I'd always try to be thankful for things that I'll go outside and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I live here, or I'm so grateful for my family, or just anything. I practice radical gratitude. I'm so grateful for the life I have.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. And, borrow the tradition. I think that's a wonderful one to express the good that happens each day. That's a wonderful sentiment. And certainly the experience that your family has been through, both your mom and yourself, hey, there is a lot to be thankful for. I want to congratulate you on your journey. I want to share that I've been inspired just in this conversation
Thank
by
you.
the strength that you've shown and even your willingness to share, because I know a lot of this is deeply personal and things that you've gone through. Kayla, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you as well.
a very good rest of your day, and maybe this conversation, I'm hopeful that it certainly is one very good thing that has happened for me today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Enjoy the day.